I've lived long enough to know when I've been a fool. And the hardest part isn't even admitting that. The hardest part is understanding just how long the foolishness lasted. How many mornings I woke up convinced I was doing everything right, building something, becoming someone, while the things that actually mattered were quietly slipping through my fingers like sand. My name is Raymond. I grew up in a small mill town in western Pennsylvania, the kind of place where the air smelled like rust and rain, where the streets were narrow and the ambitions were supposed to be too. Men in that town didn't talk about feelings. They didn't talk about dreams, not out loud anyway. What they talked about was work. How much of it you did, how little you complained, how straight you kept your back, even when everything in you wanted to fold. Broad shoulders, calloused hands, a face that had slowly, over the years, forgotten how to be soft. He worked the same textile plant for 31 years, same shift, same lunch pail, same heavy walk through the front door every evening just after 6. He never missed a day, never asked for anything extra, just showed up, did the work, and came home. And I watched him. Every single evening, I watched him. I couldn't have been older than 9 or 10, but I understood something the way children understand things, not with their minds, but somewhere deeper, somewhere that doesn't need language. I watched how certain men talked over my father at church gatherings, like his voice didn't quite carry the same weight as theirs. I watched how the men with pressed shirts and polished shoes didn't bother returning his nod on Sunday mornings. I watched how my father would sit at the dinner table after a 12-hour shift, shoulders rounded, eyes somewhere far away, and I watched how even his exhaustion seemed to embarrass him, like being tired was a weakness he owed someone an apology for. Something shifted in me during those years. Something quiet and fierce and stubborn planted itself deep in my chest and made a promise that my mouth never spoke out loud. I will not be invisible. Not like that. I was going to be the kind of man people noticed when he walked into a room. The kind of man who got the nod, who got the respect, who never had to eat his dinner in silence, wondering if his life had amounted to anything. I was going to matter, and I was willing to do whatever it took to get there. So I worked. Lord, did I work. While other boys my age were out at the creek on summer afternoons, I was picking up extra shifts at the hardware store downtown. While my friends were figuring out who they were in their 20s, I was already laser focused on who I was going to become. I took night classes. I chased every opportunity that came within arm's reach, and a few that didn't. I outworked everyone around me, not because I loved the work, but because every hour I put in felt like another brick in a wall between me and that image of my father, tired and invisible, eating his dinner alone with his thoughts. I told myself I was building a future. What I didn't understand then, what would take me decades of grinding and achieving and still somehow feeling hollow to finally see, is that I wasn't building anything at all. I was running from a feeling I'd never named, a feeling that had been living inside me since I was a boy, standing in that kitchen doorway, watching a good and decent man be treated like he didn't matter. That feeling had a grip on me I didn't even know about. It was steering my every decision, fueling my every ambition, whispering in the back of every sleepless night. Prove it. Prove you're worth something. Prove you're enough. And I listened to that whisper for 50 years. 50 years. By the time I finally stopped long enough to question it, really question it, I was an old man. And the life I had so carefully, so relentlessly constructed was sitting right there in front of me, and I felt almost nothing. By my early 40s, I had everything the boy from that Pennsylvania mill town had promised himself he would have. A title on a door, a salary that would have made my father's eyes go wide, a house with a 2-car garage in a neighborhood where the lawn stayed green and the streets stayed quiet. People at the office called me Mr. Hartley. Younger employees straightened up a little when I walked into a room. I had built exactly what I set out to build, and still, underneath all of it, something was wrong. I couldn't name it back then. I wouldn't have even admitted it if someone had asked me directly. Because admitting that the life you sacrificed everything to create still leaves you feeling empty is a terrifying thing to say out loud. So I didn't say it. I just kept moving, kept pushing, kept telling myself that the feeling was temporary, that I was almost there, that the next level, the next promotion, the next milestone, the next number in the bank account would finally be the one that made everything settle into place. The finish line kept moving. I kept running. But it was my marriage that started showing me the real cost of all that running, long before I was ready to see it. Her name was Carol, and she was, without question, the best thing that ever happened to me. Warm in a way I didn't know how to be, patient in a way I didn't deserve. She had a laugh that could fill a room, and a way of making everyone around her feel like they were the most important person in the world. She tried to make me feel that way too. I was just never fully there to receive it. See, I told myself I was doing everything for her, for our family. Every long hour, every missed dinner, every weekend I spent at the office instead of at home, I had a justification ready. I was providing. I was securing our future. I was making sure she never had to worry the way my mother worried. Never had to count grocery money the way we counted it growing up. That was how I showed love. That was the only language I really knew. But Carol didn't need a bigger house. She needed a husband who came home and actually arrived. I remember one evening, our daughter must have been around 7 years old. I walked through the front door at nearly 9 o'clock, dinner long cold on the stove, the house quiet. Carol was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking, just waiting. Not angry. That almost would have been easier. She was just tired. Tired in that deep, resigned way that told me this wasn't the first time, and she was running out of ways to explain it. She looked at me and said, "Raymond, I don't need more from you. I just need you. Not the version of you that's already thinking about tomorrow's meetings. Not the version that's here in body, but somewhere else completely. Just you, present, here with us." I nodded. I told her I understood. I didn't understand at all. I thought presence meant proximity. I thought as long as I was physically in the house, I was showing up. I kept paying the bills, kept upgrading the life around us, kept mistaking provision for connection. And the distance between us grew so quietly, so gradually, that I barely noticed it happening until one morning I looked across the breakfast table at the woman I had built this entire life beside and realized we had become polite strangers sharing a kitchen. We came close to losing everything at around that time. There were conversations that went late into the night, heavy and honest in ways we hadn't been with each other in years. There were tears, hers, and eventually, reluctantly, mine. There were things said that couldn't be unsaid, and silences that were somehow even louder. And through all of it, a slow and uncomfortable truth was beginning to surface. The problem was never the job. The problem was never the hours or the ambition or even the money. The problem was me. The wall I had built around myself since childhood. The beliefs buried so deep I didn't even know it was there. That if I stopped achieving, stopped producing, stopped proving myself at every turn, I would somehow disappear. Just like I was afraid my father had. There are moments in a life that split everything into before and after. I had mine on a Tuesday morning in November. The kind of cold, gray morning where the sky sits low and heavy and the world outside feels like it's holding its breath. I was 64 years old. I had just come off a brutal stretch at work. Months of pressure, late nights, the kind of relentless grinding I had normalized so completely I didn't even recognize it as suffering anymore. I walked into the house that evening, and Carol was sitting in the living room with her hands folded in her lap, and an expression on her face I had never seen before. Not anger, not sadness, something worse. She looked at me the way you look at someone you have already said goodbye to in your heart. You just haven't found the words yet for your mouth. "Raymond," she said quietly, "I need you to really hear me this time." And something about the way she said it, so calm, so tired, so completely done with hoping, cracked something open in my chest that I had kept sealed shut for 40 years. She told me she loved me. She said that first, and I could hear how much she meant it, which somehow made everything that came after hurt even more. She told me she had spent the better part of 3 decades loving a man who was always half somewhere else. She told me she had raised our children largely alone, not because I wasn't in the building, but because even when I was home, I was unreachable. She told me our daughter had stopped trying to tell me things when she was about 12 years old because she figured I wasn't really listening anyway. That one stopped my breath completely. Our daughter, my little girl, had given up on being heard by me when she was 12 years old, and I hadn't even noticed. I sat down slowly in the chair across from Carol, and I didn't say anything for a long time. There was nothing to defend. There was no argument to make. Every word she was saying was the truth, and the truth was sitting on my chest like something heavy and immovable and completely deserved. I thought about my father then. Isn't that strange? In the middle of the most painful conversation of my marriage, I thought about that man eating his dinner in silence, and for the first time in my life, I wondered if maybe I had misread everything. Maybe he wasn't invisible because he lacked ambition. Maybe he was just tired, human, doing his best inside a life that was harder than it looked from a kitchen doorway. And maybe, in my desperate scramble to be nothing like him, I had become something worse. My father was present, poor and tired and overlooked, but present. He was at every dinner table. He was in that house. He knew his children's faces. I had the corner office, the title, the financial security, and I had missed my daughter's entire childhood because I was too busy proving I was worth something to actually be something. I broke that night, not dramatically, not in the way they show it in films. It was quieter than that, and somehow more devastating. Just a 64-year-old man sitting in his own living room, finally out of defenses, finally out of justifications, with tears running down a face that had spent decades pretending it didn't need to cry. Carol crossed the room and sat beside me. She didn't say anything. She just put her hand over mine. And that small, simple gesture, that quiet, unearned grace, undid me completely. Because she didn't have to do that. After everything, after all the years of absence and distraction and emotional unavailability wrapped up in the costume of a hardworking husband, she still chose to reach across and touch my hand. That was the moment I finally understood what I had been chasing all those years was never out there in the world at all. It was always here, right here in this room, in this woman's hand over mine. I had been so consumed with becoming someone worthy of love that I had completely neglected the love that was already, patiently, stubbornly, miraculously still there. And I had nearly destroyed it looking for it somewhere else. That night changed everything, not all at once. Not in a clean, dramatic way we wished transformation would work. It was slow, uncomfortable, like learning to walk again after spending decades moving in the wrong direction. But something fundamental had shifted inside me, and there was no going back to the man I was before that living room conversation. I retired 8 months later, not because I had to, because I finally chose to. For the first time in my adult life, I made a decision that wasn't driven by ambition or fear or the need to prove something to a world that honestly wasn't paying nearly as much attention as I thought it was. I walked away from the title, the office, the identity I had spent 40 years constructing, and I chose presence instead. Carol and I started over in the quietest, most ordinary ways, morning coffee together, without phones or newspapers or the noise of a workday already pulling me somewhere else. Long walks in the evenings where we actually talked, not about schedules or finances or logistics, but about real things, memories, regrets, hopes we had never voiced out loud. I started listening to her the way she had deserved to be listened to from the very beginning. And slowly, in the space that opened up between us, when I finally stopped filling it with distraction, something tender and real began to grow back. We weren't starting fresh. We were too old and too honest with each other for that kind of romantic notion. We were rebuilding. Carefully, gratefully, with the full understanding of how close we had come to losing it entirely. That was one of the hardest phone calls of my life. Harder than any boardroom conversation, any difficult negotiation, anything the professional world had ever thrown at me. Because this time, I couldn't hide behind competence. I just had to be honest. I told her I knew I had been absent. I told her I was sorry, not in a rushed, uncomfortable way, but slowly and deliberately, making sure she understood I meant every word of it. There was a long silence on her end of the line, and then she said, "Dad, I just always wanted you to see me." I had to set the phone down for a moment after that. All those years, all that striving and achieving and building, and all my daughter ever wanted was for her father to simply see her. I see her now. Here is what I know at this point in my life, what I wish with everything in me that I had understood 40 years earlier. The things you are chasing right now, whatever they are not the problem. Ambition is not the enemy. Working hard is not the enemy. Building a life for yourself and the people you love is a noble thing. But if you are chasing those things, trying to fill something broken inside you, trying to finally feel worthy or safe or loved, you will run forever and never arrive. Because that finish line was never real. I know. I ran toward it for 50 years. The worthiness you are looking for is not waiting at the next milestone. It is not sitting in a bigger salary or a better title or a house that finally impresses the right people. It was inside you before you ever started running. You were enough before the world ever told you that you had to prove it. Stop waiting to arrive. Stop telling yourself you will rest when you finish. You will be present when things settle down. You will finally live when everything lines up perfectly. Everything will never line up perfectly. That is not a tragedy. That is just life. And this, right here, right now, with all its mess and imperfection and unfinished edges, this is your life. Not the version coming later, this one. I am an old man who learned that lesson later than I should have. But I did learn it. And Carol's hand is still in mine. That is enough. That has always been enough. If this story moved something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more honest conversations like this one, follow along. There is still plenty left to say.